Hi there, I'm Ken Lammers. This is Commonplace Catholic, and we have a Pope, and he's a Chicago White Sox fan. So, let's get to it.
Lord Jesus Christ.
युगान युग तेरा ही है.
Ilekroć bowiem sprawujemy pamiątkę ofiary Chrystusa.
Kweli ni vema na haki tukushukuru daima na popote, Bwana Baba mwema.
主の御体と御血になりますように。
Okay, so it's the second day of the selection for the Pope, right? And the night before, I can remember I'm flipping through, and suddenly there's like breaking news. I'm like, oh wow, did they check on the first round? No, it's breaking news. No Pope chosen. And they show like black smoke. I'm like, really? So I didn't really expect it to be on the second day either. And so, I'm going to work because this was going on during a weekday, and lunchtime rolls around. I get my food, I get my drink. I'm sitting there at my desk in my office, and I flip on one of the 9 million YouTube channels that's just sitting there focused in on the chimney, watching the chimney, right? And there's white smoke billowing out of it. I'm like, whoa, what in the world? Where did this come from? And turned out they had chosen a pope already. And so I get my food, and like 3 or 4 of the people in my office come in. Go, what, Ken? What's going on? What's going on with this? They kind of heard what was going on, and they're standing there behind my desk watching my computer screen because as a token Catholic, I know what's going on, really, and so then they announce that the new pope, Leo the 14th, is Cardinal Robert Francis Prevost. And they're like, who's he? And I'm like, I have no idea. Who is this guy? Because I knew I knew who the traditionalists wanted, and I knew who the heterodox were pushing towards, and kind of other people that they were saying might be compromise candidates. I'd never heard of this guy, right? Which shows you that no matter how much the news media babbles and YouTube channels babble and that, we don't know what's in the heart of these cardinals as they go in and how they're going to choose the next person to lead God's church. Now, I have watched a little bit since then, and he is supposedly something of a compromise candidate, but on the other hand, I've seen, this is all over Twitter, you can go find it, or X or whatever, you can go find it. The theory is something along the lines of this. Okay, so come in, and he's got some support from the South American Cardinals, and he's got support from the American Cardinals, and then he starts, then the African Cardinals come on board, and then a good portion of the Asian Cardinals come on board, right? Which swamps the European, German, and Italian Cardinals try to push their guys through, and Parolin and them, Zuppi, Parolin, whomever else, and they don't. They've got a significant support, but they're not getting there. And then they look around and go, "Wow, this guy's got Asia, Africa, America, both Americas, and here we go. Here's your next pope." I think it also helps that he doesn't really have a hard record. Everybody seems to like him. He's an accountant, so maybe he can square away some things that he's squaring away. And, everybody just seems to like the guy. And they also, all because he doesn't really have a huge record, can kind of see what they want to see. And that's what you're going to see here, folks, for the next, year to 2 years, at least for the next few months. Everybody's going to see what they want to see, right? If you're a hard right winger, you're going to see him doing this and that. And, if you're a hard left winger, heterodox, you're going to see he's doing this and that. Or if you want somebody that you can use as a riposte, you're going to say, oh, look, he's doing this, and that shows he's wrong, that sort of thing. So that will be going on until there's enough time for him to actually build a record of his own. So wait to watch his actions a little bit. Don't really freak out when these people are going through and reading line for line his homilies that he's done now, is doing now, etc. like that. Wait till you see what some of his actual acts are. Okay, having said that, before we get really in depth on the Pope, let's talk about what the news of this week's really been. So, of course, the biggest news thing is the Pope, and we'll get into that in depth in a little bit. The next biggest thing, at least coming through my news feeds, is Pakistan and India, who are openly trying to kill each other at the moment, but not sending troops over the line, right? So they're using artillery, they're using drones, they're using airplanes, they're just back and forth across the line that way, but so far, up to now, nobody has crossed the line and started an actual ground war, because that would be a huge escalation, and there's been some talk that this may de-escalate in the near future. We'll have to see about that. But this is a terrifying situation where if one side really starts to get an advantage over the other in a ground war, well, then tactical nukes are going to start flying probably. And then strategic nukes are going to start flying probably. And it's a really scary situation. So keep an eye on it, folks. Next thing, Trump. It's always Trump. There's always going to be stuff about Trump. I mean, he loves the attention, and the news media loves him because they can do things to throw attention at him. And of course, they're going on about tariffs, which we'll see how that works out. And they're going on about him sending illegal immigrants back to whichever country they came from, or other countries if they're actually criminals. Of course, there are always, whenever you're doing something like that, going to be some sad stories, and then they're plumbing those for every eye they can get to watch the screen, right? So go watch that on your own. I'm not going to get into that politics stuff too much. And then finally, the one that really stuck in my craw is that the state of Washington, out on the West Coast, passed a blatantly anti-Catholic statute. No doubt about it. Their formerly Catholic governor signed it, and while they wrote it generically enough, and I have read it, they wrote it generically enough that you could say, well, it applies to all clergymen, which is a problem itself, but it applies to all clergymen, not just Catholics. When he signed it in front of a bunch of people, bragging about how he's Catholic and signing away the confessional, he pretty much made it very clear this was about breaking the confessional, the seal of the confessional. Now, there's been pushback. The archbishop out there, immediately sends out a letter saying, "No, any priest that does this, you're going to get excommunicated." Right? That's an instant excommunication if you break the confessional. And now, of course, there's stories about the DOJ coming after him for violating the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which it pretty clearly is. I mean, if you read the statute, it goes, all these people have to report. If privilege exists, except that for clergymen, you don't have to report. They specifically wrote in that if it has to do with religion, if it's about religion, you don't get privilege. So doctor gets privilege, psychologist gets privilege, but that priest you're going to the confessional, they don't get privilege. That is kind of an abomination. And I'm not worried about priests breaking the seal of the confessional. To be honest, they're not going to. But what I worry about here is that breaks it wide open. So you're law enforcement, and that some guy you want to get evidence on goes to the confessional every week, every month, whatever. You could get a search warrant and stick a doggone recorder in there, or stick a mic in there or something. That's terrifying. And the formerly Catholic governor of Washington should be ashamed of himself for signing that. Um, but okay, that's something for future rants and raves. Let's go on and talk about things that are a little bit more pleasant. Uh, Pope Leo the 14th. Here he is, guys. Up until a couple days ago, this was Robert Francis Prevost, apparently called Bob by his friends. I wasn't, so I'd probably have been calling him Cardinal Prevost. But he was made, the Bishop of Rome, the Pope of 1.4 billion people in the Catholic Church, and with a lot of influence even outside of that, which it's really kind of impressive. Uh, you know, as I said before, I think part of the reason he made it is he kind of had a meteoric rise. I think kind of one of the reasons he made it was because he's seen more as Peruvian than he is, American, United States American. He grew up in Chicago, went to his initial high school seminary in Chicago, ends up going over to the Vatican for more theological training, ends up being in Peru as a missionary, and works like mad in Peru in some really awful circumstances, and then he becomes a bishop there, and then he becomes a cardinal pretty much out of Peru, although he has been back in the States and he has been head of Augustinian order, which is amazing. He's been the head of the Augustinian order, and whether that's Rome here or in the United States. And so he's done a lot. He's done a lot of pastoral work. He's a theologian, a canon lawyer, so he gets what's that. He's also an accountant, which means maybe somebody can finally straighten out the finances of the Vatican. So, wow, just wow. Now, let me kind of show you, and if you're like me, you've been walking around watching all sorts of things and picking up 9 million different things that are being said by 9 million different people. So here's like my chart of what people think of him. Now, to be clear, at this point, people are going to imprint upon him whatever they want to imprint upon him. If they want him to be a traditionalist, they're going to find things they're going to say, oh, well, he's a traditionalist. If they want him to be a heterodox, they're going, oh, look at these things, he's heterodox, right? And the people who don't just want Vatican II thrown out, they aren't going to be happy with anybody that gets chosen. So we're not going to listen to them too much. But so that's kind of, for the next 2 months to a year at least, you're just going to hear people imposing upon the Pope what they want to impose upon the Pope, or what worries they have they will impose upon the Pope, that he's going to do all these things that they don't like, right? So for a while now, we're just going to have to sit and watch what his actions are. Once he starts to act, that's when you start to see who he's going to be, and you watch as, the next few days, where every word he says is going to be parsed, that's going to be non-productive, right? Because you're not going to see how the acts come out of it. So he comes out and gives his speech, and you're watching him, and it's an American Pope. It's an American Pope, and Americans are getting all nuts about it, right? It showed some seminary where people jumped up and down like it was a football game. That's kind of embarrassing, but Americans were getting enthused here, right? And but a lot of them don't really know who this guy is. Like, if it was Burke, we'd know who Burke was, right? That sort of thing. And so, but we don't know this gentleman so much. And he gets up, and his, after habeas papam, my Latin sucks. I haven't had it for 20, 30 years. He then gives partial speech in Italian. Should do that. He's now the Bishop of Rome. Italian is called for. He does it in Spanish, part of his speech in Spanish. Should do that. He spent a lot of time in Peru. Good thing. And then he skips right over English and goes into Latin. Didn't say a word in English, which people were reading into that. I don't know whether there's anything to read into there. Really, he spent most of his time as a priest in Peru, right? And that's kind of where he went back. That's his, liturgical roots. It was kind of impressive that he did Latin and he did wore the garbs and all that. But he didn't say anything in English, and everybody's like, oh, he didn't say anything in English. He's downplaying the fact that he's an American, which I personally think they probably did more look towards him as a Peruvian than an American when they elected him, but that's where it is. How did he get elected? If you go on to Twitter or /X/ whatever you want to call it, there were theories all over the place, and the main one that seemed to be sticking with everybody was, well, the American bishops wanted him, North American bishops wanted him, of course the South American bishops wanted him, not bishops, cardinals wanted him. And then the Africans swung in behind it because they weren't going to get their guys because they were too conservative. As much as the traditionalists wanted the African popes, it wasn't going to happen, right? And then the Asians are supposed to have swung in, right? So everywhere outside of like Germany and Italy, the German type bishops, cardinals, and the Italians were looking towards him. And the Germans/Italians pushed their candidates, who were the ones everybody thought were the front runners, and realized, we can only get so high. We can't get to 2/3 with these guys. And then you get Leo the 14th, Cardinal Prevost, who is somebody who doesn't have a whole lot of history, and everybody can see in him what they want to see in him, right? He's kind of a quiet guy, likable from all accounts, and he's an accountant. He can straighten up the Vatican finances. He's a canon lawyer, so he'll know things, how to work things the way the canon law says. He's done Latin masses, right? He talks about the synods, wanting to continue synods. So he's kind of there, right? But nobody knows exactly. So they all coalesce around him, and he becomes our next pope. He did say, by the way, when he didn't say anything the night before, the next day, or when he did his first mass for the cardinals, during his homily, he started out in English and then went into Italian, right? So he's, he did go to English. I wonder there if somebody went, hey, Pope Leo, the people are kind of wondering why you didn't say English, go into anything in English. And he went, I've not really been an English bishop or anything. And, well, maybe I better do that. You think maybe that's what he did. We'll never know. Anyway, here is your handy-dandy chart of all the things that I've seen people saying about him that would tend to say that he goes their way, or that he's going to be evil because he's going to go the other way, or whatever, right? So let's start out with is he going to be a traditionalist? Up here in the top, traditional. Well, he chose Leo the 14th, a pre-consular name, a pre-Vatican II name, and that shows he's traditional, right? He's wore the garb. He wore the vestments. Pope Francis didn't. He did. He wore them. I'm here to be Pope, right? That's more traditional. Prayer, he said, he said the prayer in Latin, did the whole thing. So, yeah, that would tend to be more traditional. Then there's a record of him kind of not going along with the whole gender thing, you swapping genders around thing. And he has clearly in the past said no women deacons or priests, right? So, and he is also, for those of you who didn't follow a lot of the American press, they figured this out real quick. he's a Republican, and when he's in the United States, and has gone and done things in Republican primaries before, which is interesting. Although I think he's a pre-Trump Republican, but still, that means he's going to be somewhere on the conservative side of the United States. So those are the people who want to see that he's going to be a traditionalist. Look up towards that and go, look, he's heading toward traditionalism. Okay, now the people who want to see him as going heterodox, right? They look at him and they go, okay, the name, Leo the 14th, that harkens back to Leo the 13th, who was who laid out a bunch of social work for the Catholic Church and was in favor of good things for workers and stuff like that, right? Interesting. And go read Rerum Novarum yourself, I guess. And he he was appointed by Pope Francis. He apparently got along pretty well with Pope Francis. He said good things about Pope Francis, like you're going to say bad things about the prior Pope, right? He said good things about Pope Francis. He has said that he's made the talk about synods. Now, what he's talking about with synods, as opposed to what Pope Francis was talking about synods, we'll see. It may go, it may not, may be totally different. He, like every single pope and Catholic bishop and priest, as long as I've been alive, is really strong pro-immigration, right? The church looks and sees there are people starving and dying of starvation and having all these problems in other countries, and they look over here in the United States where the standard of living is even the poorest person has a television, right? A totally unnecessary thing, right? Even the poorest person probably has a toaster, or at least a toaster oven or a microwave, right? Not necessary things, right? They look around and go, look, these people need to go where they can be helped, and that's the place. So that's been kind of a church thing as long as I've been around, right? He also has made nods towards him being an environmentalist, although he hasn't really said anything about that since he's been appointed that I can remember. So that's where, if you want to say he's a heterodox, you look at that. Oh, he's there. He's heterodox. He's going to be that. And then there are other things that are kind of outside of it. He's an Augustinian, which means he's a member of the Augustinian order. He follows their rules, and it's a pretty extensive set of rules. And he's been a prior before for them. I think he's head of the Augustinians for a couple terms. Pretty impressive, right? Let's see. Peruvian. He's a naturalized citizen of Peru, which apparently he did just before he became a bishop. He was a bishop there, and of course they say in the prayer he said part of the prayer in Spanish, reflecting his Peruvian angle, his Peruvian self. And then we get the American stuff. He's born and raised in Chicago. Apparently, he's born at the same hospital that Blessed Father Tolton died at. And for those of you who don't know who Tolton was, he's the first African-American priest in the United States. But he apparently born in that hospital. He's a White Sox fan. He's got two brothers who I'm hoping don't turn into Billy Carter on him, but seem to be maybe there. And the American tie is there, but I can't say that I think that it's the same thing as though he were a cardinal actually here, right, in the States. I don't think it's the strongest tie. He's done things American, like be part of an American political party and all that, but I think his ties really are stronger to Peru and to Rome. So that's kind of where that stands. And of course, as is going to happen every single time anybody gets a position in the church, the people who are invested in making the abuse scandals stand up and be bad and blaming anybody who has anything to do with the Catholic Church on it have done some digging, and they found some stuff in the United States which I think is relatively weak, right? And then there's stuff over in Peru that they make claims about, which I don't have any real, I don't have any ability to judge that. The stuff from the United States looks weak, right? But they will try to paint him with it, just like they try to paint anybody else who got chosen with it. So this is the general all around. This is Pope Leo the 14th. Look at it. Take from this what you will. Try to choose what you think he's going to be, so that you can get on YouTube just like me and go, he's a fill in the blank, right? I will say I've watched liberal YouTube Catholic broadcasters have been fairly happy about him. Conservatives initially had like a knee-jerk reaction against him, but I've seen a fair number of them go, look, no, we are obligated to give him a chance. We cannot assume that he's going to be Francis. We have to give him a chance to show what he's going to do, right? Now, I have seen some really significant, or not significant, some pretty far out there rights saying, no, he's just Francis again, right? He's going to be bad. Bad, bad, bad. Of course, the people who really think that we should throw out Vatican II completely and maybe Vatican I completely are out there going, no, no, he's terrible. But they were going to say that no matter what. I think the most interesting right-wing thing that I saw was the reason they appointed him is so he can keep doing what Francis did, and they think that the Americans, which have been trending conservative for a long time now in the lay communities, will just have to shut up because he's an American. And we ain't going to do that. Well, I can tell you that we're not going to do that. Americans don't do that. But I don't think anybody really has a fix on him. They don't know what he's going to be. You can look at this and see how much there is there to look at and try to figure it out. And there's more. I guarantee you there's a lot more. But, this is what I came up with. So go look at some of the stuff he said, some of the stuff he's written, and try to figure it out yourself. I don't think you will. I think you'll find, just like everybody else, you're going to have to wait to see who he is through his acts, which is what we all should do. So that's it for this week, folks. And happy to have Pope Leo the 14th out there. I hope, my personal hope, is he becomes somebody that's kind of down the middle, that just leaves the people who want the Latin Mass alone. Let them have the Latin Mass. For goodness sake, I don't understand the hate of Latin Mass. It's not like, oh, we can have Latin Mass and 90% of the people go to it. No, we can have Latin Mass means, 10% of your people go to it, if that many. And yeah, I know it may be your church that grows quick, really, but you're not going to get 80, 90% of the people in the church to go from their local church across town to the one that's doing Latin Mass, right? It's not going to happen. So leave the guys with the Latin Mass alone and just let things calm down a little bit. That's kind of a hope on my part. And, we'll see. Like I say, we're going to have to see what his actions are and how things play out. All right, let me say everything I normally say now. If you like it, hit like. If you really like it, hit subscribe. If you really, really like it, hit the little bell so that you get everything that I put out, thrown in your face. There is no imprimatur here. It has not been approved from the lowest hermit to, Father Leo the 14th, the Pope. Nobody has approved this within the church. Now, again, I haven't had the Inquisition show up either, but it's probably because I'm just such a small fish. Folks, go with God. Be happy we have a Pope, and let's hope the church goes forward in good faith. I will see you next time.